Before diving into the video, did you know that over 80% of you watching right now aren't subscribed? Your one like and one subscribe means the absolute world to this channel and helps us keep going. Hit those buttons real quick, and let's get into the video. Chapter 1. The Return of the Ghost. Julian was never one to deny his true nature. In a world full of people trying to paint themselves as saints, he proudly wore the label of a punk, a jerk, and a shameless bastard. He was the local legend whispered about in hushed, scandalized tones. The guy who had ruthlessly stolen the elegant, untouchable campus queen, Elena, right out from under the nose of her wealthy, devoted boyfriend Liam. Julian had played the villain so perfectly that he had eventually forced Liam to pack his bags and flee the country entirely. Julian still remembered the day of Liam's departure with crystal clarity. Liam had stood at the airport terminal, looking absolutely devastated, his eyes rimmed with red. He had looked at Elena one last time, choking back tears as he told her he was letting her go so she could pursue her own happiness. It was a scene straight out of a tragic romance novel. But Liam could never have anticipated what happened next. The very second he walked through the security gate, Elena had spun around, thrown herself wildly into Julian's arms, and happily giggled, calling him her husband, while celebrating that their obstacle was finally out of the picture. For 3 years after their subsequent engagement, Julian lived comfortably, believing the battle was won and he could finally rest. But life has a habit of throwing a wrench into the gears. Out of nowhere, news broke that Liam had returned to the country. That exact evening, Elena failed to come home. She didn't call, and she didn't answer his texts. Instead of pacing the floor in a panic, Julian sat on his sofa, took out his phone, and opened a chat with a contact saved under the contact name Seraphina. He typed a brief, lazy message. "My place. Come over." Within 3 seconds, his phone buzzed. Seraphina, his stunning and fiery ex-girlfriend, replied with biting annoyance. "How many times has it been already, Julian? You always call me the second you get drunk. Let me remind you, I'm your ex-girlfriend, not your emotional punching bag." Julian didn't reply. Instead, he clicked on his pinned chat with Elena. Her last message, sent an hour prior, read, "My bestie just got dumped. I'm staying over at her place tonight to comfort her, so don't wait up for me." Julian stared at the screen and let out a dry, cynical laugh. Elena's bestie was Seraphina, and Seraphina was currently sitting at home, texting him. It didn't take a genius to put the pieces together. Elena was lying, and she had undoubtedly gone straight to see her newly returned ex-boyfriend, Liam. 10 minutes later, the sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the quiet apartment. Julian opened it to find Seraphina standing on the threshold. She was dressed elegantly, her arms crossed, her lips pursed in a pout as she rolled her eyes. "Why aren't you asking your precious fiancé to keep you company tonight?" she asked coldly, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She stood stiffly, acting like a wild, temperamental cat waiting to be coaxed. Julian didn't bother with words. He reached out, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her forcefully inside, slamming the door behind her. Before she could protest, he pinned her against the entryway wall and silenced her with a hard, breathless kiss. Seraphina's hands initially pushed against his chest in weak resistance, but within seconds, her defenses crumbled. Her arms wrapped tightly around his neck, and she began kissing him back with a desperate intensity. When they finally broke apart, she leaned weakly against his chest, her breathing shallow. "She's not coming back tonight," Julian said casually, his voice low. He looked down at her. Liam is back in town. Seraphina's entire body stiffened in his embrace. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Are you finally going to break up with her then?" Julian slowly shook his head, a cold, ruthless smile playing on his lips. "No, she's someone I worked very hard to win over." Seraphina let out a soft, mocking laugh, tracing a finger down his collarbone. "You really are incredibly patient, Julian, like a stubborn turtle hiding inside its shell." Julian remained silent. In his mind, a simple, dark truth echoed. Once you steal something from someone else, you never give it back, even if it was never truly yours to begin with. Chapter 2. The Price of Practical Value. Julian's mind drifted back to how this chaotic web first began. In their university's social circle, he had always been cast as the villain. He was the broke, shameless guy who supposedly betrayed his brother Liam by chasing his girl. Elena had been the undisputed goddess of C University, cold, beautiful, and seemingly untouchable. The moment Julian laid eyes on her, he was captivated. He went through immense trouble, sweet-talking classmates and pulling favors just to get her WeChat contact info. He began pursuing her relentlessly, sending her messages every day. But Elena was pragmatic. One afternoon, during a casual conversation, she subtly hinted to Julian that her phone was acting up and constantly freezing. Julian, who was scraping by on a tight student budget, couldn't afford to buy her a new one and awkwardly laughed the comment off. Elena's attitude shifted instantly. Sensing Julian's lack of financial power, she posted a public status update on her social media feed later that night. "I'm gradually realizing that I'm becoming a very materialistic girl. Whenever a guy approaches me, if he can't provide any practical value, I instantly feel like he's useless to me. I don't even have the energy to reply to his messages." It was a direct, public slap to Julian's face. To make matters worse, Liam, who was already wealthy and actively looking for a way to win Elena's favor, commented publicly underneath her post, "That's not being materialistic, Elena. That's called waking up. I'm a guy myself, and honestly, I can't stand cheap, useless men either." Liam knew exactly how to play the game. He immediately launched a massive, high-profile pursuit of Elena, showering her with expensive gifts, elaborate flower deliveries, and grand public gestures. In the grand narrative of the university, Liam was the devoted, wealthy prince, Elena was the sophisticated princess, and Julian was merely the pathetic, broke loser who served as a stepping stone to highlight the high standards of the beautiful female lead. While Julian's honest attempt at love died before it even reached the starting line, Liam spoiled Elena to an absurd degree. He transferred his entire monthly allowance to her bank account every single month under the transaction note, voluntary gift, and bought her whatever luxury designer handbags and cosmetics she glanced at. Back in their shared dorm room, Liam would sit on his bed, look down at Julian, and lecture him condescendingly. "Let me tell you something, Julian. Whether it's dating or marriage, if men don't spend money on women, then who will? If you're too stingy to spend money on a girl, what kind of relationship are you even talking about? You're just wasting everyone's time." Julian had stared at his own reflection in the dorm mirror, his pride utterly shattered. He was handsome, sharp, and ambitious, yet he was being treated like garbage because of his bank account. It was at that moment he decided, if everyone wants to cast me as the vicious, shameless villain of this story, then I will play the part to absolute perfection. I will do the one thing they don't expect. I will take Elena away from him. Chapter 3. The Taste of Hot Pot and Rebellion. Liam, genuinely believing that Julian was his loyal, harmless brother who had accepted defeat, began constantly inviting Julian to tag along on his dates with Elena. Julian knew exactly what Liam was doing. He wanted to show off his wealth, rub his success in Julian's face, and keep Julian around as a permanent audience member to his grand romance. Julian never refused. In fact, he leaned into it. If he was going to be the third wheel, he was going to make sure he looked good doing it. For a dinner date at a popular hot pot restaurant, Julian spent an hour styling his hair and dressed in his trendiest designer outfit. When he arrived at the restaurant, Liam warmly clapped him on the shoulder, introducing him to Elena. "Elena, you remember Julian, right? He's my best bro." Elena glanced at Julian, her expression cold and dismissive, and gave a stiff nod before turning back to her phone. The dinner began, but the environment was less than ideal for Julian's styled appearance. The heavy, rising steam from the boiling hot pot quickly flattened his carefully styled hair, and the spicy, pungent broth made his throat itch. He began coughing quietly. When Liam excused himself to use the restroom, Julian, distracted by his coughing fit, blindly grabbed a glass of water from the table and drank it down to soothe his throat. Slam! A loud bang rattled the plates. Julian blinked and looked up. Elena had slammed her napkin onto the table, glaring at him with pure, unadulterated disgust, as if he were a cockroach that had just crawled onto her plate. Julian looked down and realized his mistake. In his rush, he had grabbed Elena's glass of water. The rim of the glass still bore the faint, distinct mark of her pink lipstick. I've met plenty of disgusting, scheming men in my life, Julian, Elena snapped, her voice whispering fiercely so the surrounding tables wouldn't hear. But you really take the cake. You knew exactly whose glass this was. You know exactly why you keep tagging along on our dates. Julian, refusing to show any embarrassment, calmly picked up a piece of meat with his chopsticks, ate it, and smirked. Elena, I came here for the free food. I'm far too busy enjoying this expensive beef to obsess over you. Elena snorted mockingly. Shameless. You're broke, yet you still care so much about your face and pride. Julian wiped his mouth with a napkin, leaned across the table, and let his eyes wander over her face. When a guy is chasing a goddess, he has to learn to throw his pride in the trash. Besides, what's the point of caring about my pride? It's not like you're going to kiss me anyway. Furious, Elena swept her hand across the table, accidentally knocking a glass to the ground, where it shattered into pieces. She leaned in, her eyes wild with anger, and whispered, I am your best friend's girlfriend. Are you insane? You are absolutely disgusting. Her helpless, trembling fury only made Julian's blood run hot. The thrill of provoking her was intoxicating. Oh, you think this is disgusting? Julian shrugged, a dangerous glint in his eyes. I can be much worse. Before she could react, Julian reached across the small table, grabbed the back of her head, pulled her forward, and kissed her forcefully on the lips. Elena froze in sheer horror. The kiss lasted for several agonizing seconds before she violently shoved him away. She fell back in her seat, gasping for air, dry heaving as she aggressively rubbed her sleeve against her lips to erase any trace of him. I will kill you, she shook, her hand flying up to slap him. Julian didn't flinch. He simply grinned, leaning back in his chair. Go ahead. But Liam is about to walk out of that restroom. Do you really want your devoted boyfriend to find out that you just kissed his best bro at the dinner table? Elena's hand froze in midair. Just then, Liam returned, completely oblivious. He sat down, looked at Elena, and frowned. Elena, your lips look incredibly red. Are you okay? Did the spicy broth burn you? Elena, her face pale, refused to look at Julian. She grabbed her purse, stood up, and yanked Liam by the arm. We're leaving. I feel sick. From that day on, Elena's hatred for Julian became an active obsession. She took long detours around campus just to avoid him. But whenever they did cross paths, Julian would corner her, whispering that her hatred only excited him, driving her to run away in a panic. Chapter 4. The Karaoke Lounge. A few weeks later, Liam organized a gathering at a high-end karaoke lounge, inviting Julian along with Elena's close circle of wealthy friends. Liam pulled Julian aside beforehand, claiming he wanted Julian there to help talk him up and make him look good in front of Elena's friends. Julian knew it was just another display of social dominance, but he agreed anyway, solely because he knew Elena would be there. When they walked into the dimly lit, luxurious VIP room, Liam intentionally lagged half a step behind Julian. Naturally, the eyes of the friends sitting on the plush leather sofas landed on Julian first. Oh wow, is this Elena's famous boyfriend? One of the girls exclaimed, admiring Julian's tall stature and sharp features. He's gorgeous. Julian smirked, stepped aside, and gestured to Liam. No, I'm just a sidekick. This is the main character, the true boyfriend. Elena, who was sitting in the corner, knit her brows in deep disgust the moment she saw Julian. But as soon as Liam approached, she instantly put on a sweet, radiant smile, throwing herself into Liam's arms in an affectionate display for her friends. Liam wrapped his arm around her waist, glowing with smug satisfaction, completely ignoring Julian's presence. Left to fend for himself, Julian accepted a drink from one of the girls and sat down on an adjacent sofa. The music was loud, but Julian's sharp ears caught Elena whispering sharply to Liam over the thumping bass. Why did you bring Julian here? You know I can't stand him. Liam laughed, patting her hand. Come on, baby, I just wanted to introduce my little bro to some of your cute friends. He needs help in the romance department. Elena sneered, casting a disdainful glance in Julian's direction. My friends aren't running a trash recycling center, Liam. Who would ever want a broke, useless loser like him? Julian watched them. He noticed the subtle, smug curl on Liam's lips at her insult. Liam loved hearing how much Elena despised Julian, as it validated his own superiority. Elena pouted, leaning closer to Liam. Just make him stop looking at me like that. The way he stares at me is incredibly weird and creepy. Liam patted her shoulder dismissively. You're overthinking it, baby. Julian isn't that kind of guy. Sensing Julian's intense, shameless gaze locking onto them, Elena looked up. Instead of averting his eyes like a caught schoolboy, Julian slowly raised his glass to her, arched a single eyebrow in blatant provocation, and took a slow sip. Elena turned her head away in absolute disgust, her cheeks flushing with anger. Chapter 5. A dangerous turn of the cards. As the night wore on and the alcohol flowed, someone suggested playing a game of kings. The rules were simple, but the atmosphere grew tense as the cards were dealt. I'm the king, one of the girls shrieked, waving her card in the air. She scanned the room, looking to stir up some drama. All right, I order number 3 and number 9 to change their social media profile pictures to matching couple photos for the next 3 days. Julian lazily flipped his card over on the table. Well, looks like I'm number 3. An awkward, heavy silence instantly fell over the room. The friends looked around, wondering who held the matching card. Slowly, with a stiff hand, Elena tossed her card onto the table. It was the number 9. The room went dead silent. Everyone knew how much Elena supposedly detested Julian, and the tension was palpable. I'm not doing it, Elena said coldly, her voice sharp. I'll take the penalty. I'll drink. Liam, wanting to show off his magnanimous, modern boyfriend persona, laughed heartily and held her back. Hey, come on, it's just a game. I'm not some petty, jealous guy who cares about a silly profile picture. Let's not ruin the fun. The crowd cheered Liam's generosity and secure masculinity, but Elena remained stubborn. No, Liam, I'm drinking the penalty. I'll drink it for you, Liam insisted. To solidifying his image as the ultimate protective partner, Liam grabbed the glass and drank 6 consecutive shots of hard liquor on her behalf. The crowd roared in approval, and Elena looked at him with a sweet, grateful expression. Julian merely watched the entire display with a cold, amused smirk, finding her desperate avoidance of him incredibly thrilling. When the next round was dealt, Julian drew the king card. He tapped it against his chin, his eyes scanning the room. All right, I order number 7 and number 10 to declare, in front of everyone, what they find sexiest about each other. I'm number 7, a sultry, smooth voice announced from the far corner of the sofa. Julian looked over. Sitting there was a breathtaking, dangerous-looking beauty with a cold, aristocratic aura, Seraphina, the wealthy and powerful heiress of the prominent Liu family. She was a level of wealth and status that even Liam couldn't easily match. Julian locked eyes with her. Well, I'm number 10. And if you're asking me, absolutely every single inch of you is incredibly sexy. Seraphina didn't blush. She stared at Julian, her gaze intense and lingering. Her eyes looked faintly red, and Julian realized with a pang of cynicism that she wasn't actually looking at him. She was looking through him, searching for the ghost of someone she couldn't forget. His eyes, Seraphina replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Probably his eyes. Julian, sensing the heavy, melancholic shift in the room, dramatically sighed and broke the tension with a joke. Wow, sweetheart, the way you're staring at me almost makes me think you've fallen in love with me. Don't make me get my hopes up. The room burst into laughter, and the heavy atmosphere dissolved, but Seraphina's gaze remained fixed on him. Chapter 6. The Broken Glass and the Hero. Needing a break from the suffocating air of the VIP room, Julian stepped out into the quiet, dimly lit hallway of the karaoke lounge. He leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath. Hey, you. Julian looked up. A young girl with heavy, cakey makeup and flashy, expensive clothes, was strutting toward him. She looked him up and down with an entitled smirk. "You're Julian, right? Buy me a drink. Let's see if you're as interesting as they say." Julian chuckled, crossing his arms. "Sorry, sweetheart. I'm broke. I don't have the money to buy you a drink." The girl's expression soured instantly. She rolled her eyes, letting out a loud scoff. "Ugh, cheap. Why do guys like you even come to places like this if you can't even afford a basic drink?" Julian's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, mocking grin. "I'm indeed cheap, sister. But honestly, even if I had the money, I wouldn't waste it on someone who clearly can't afford her own drink either. Why are you begging a broke guy for alcohol?" The girl's face flushed with anger. She pointed to her designer handbag. "Are you blind? This bag costs over 10,000 yuan. Your entire world would probably collapse if you had to buy something like this." Julian laughed loudly, taking a step closer and looking her up and down with blatant disrespect. "With the way you look, if you so much as touched a piece of fruit inside my VIP room, I have to call the police for health code violations." "You bastard." Enraged, she swung her hand to slap him across the face. But Julian's reflexes were sharp. He caught her wrist midair, his grip tightening until she whimpered. "Let me give you some advice," Julian whispered coldly. "Don't ever try to swing at me again." "Julian? What's going on here?" Julian looked up to see Seraphina walking down the hallway, a glass of wine in her hand. The angry girl immediately wrenched her wrist free and ran to Seraphina, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "Seraphina, this broke, disgusting, trashy guy was trying to hit me. He's a monster. You need to get security to throw him out." Seraphina, who had witnessed Julian's distinctly ungentlemanly behavior, looked at him with an amused curiosity. Julian decided there was no point in pretending to be a good guy. He immediately dropped to his knees, clutching his chest, and began dramatically crying out in a mock-repentant tone. "Sister, you understand me so well. Yes, it's true. I am a stingy, domestic-abusing scumbag, and my life's dream is to find a rich woman to live off of." He then pointed at the girl, his tone turning viciously mocking. "But since you're so rich and not stingy at all, why don't you transfer all your money to my bank account right now? And honestly, with a face like that, you look like you belong in a traveling circus freak show." The girl lost her mind. With a scream of fury, she lunged at Julian again. Without hesitation, Julian raised his leg and kicked her straight in the stomach, sending her sprawling onto the carpeted floor. He kicked me." "Seraphina, you saw it," the girl shrieked. Julian quickly jumped up, stepped in front of Seraphina protectively, and pointed at the crying girl. "Seraphina, watch out. I think that's actually a man in drag trying to attack us. I was just defending your honor." Seraphina stared at Julian for a long moment before bursting into a fit of wild, uncontrollable laughter. She was utterly charmed by his complete lack of shame and his bizarre, chaotic energy. She took out her phone, made a quick, quiet call, and within 2 minutes, 3 large security guards arrived and quietly dragged the screaming girl away. Left alone in the quiet hallway, Seraphina leaned against the wall, wiping a tear of laughter from her eye. She looked at Julian, her eyes sparkling. "You really are a piece of work, Julian. Give me your phone. Let's add each other on WeChat." Chapter 7, Bloodlines and Bitter Pills. Not long after the karaoke incident, Julian's phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother. The moment he pressed answer, her screeching voice blasted through the speaker. "Julian, you useless, pathetic piece of trash. Why do you think I work myself to the bone to put you through school? You've been at that university for 2 years, and you still haven't managed to get close to the prominent family. If I had known I'd raise a son as worthless as you, I would have jumped off a building years ago." Julian didn't even blink. He was entirely numb to her venom. "Then go ahead and jump, mother," he replied smoothly, his voice cold. "And let's not rewrite history. Why did you get kicked out of that family's estate by the legal wife in the first place?" "Oh, right, because you were a cheap mistress who had to resort to marrying my honest, hardworking stepfather just to survive." The relationship between Julian and his mother was nothing short of a war zone. She had tried to strangle him when he was a newborn, viewing him as a failed ticket into high society, and only his kind stepfather had intervened to save his life. His mother's tone suddenly shifted, turning into a desperate, pathetic whimper. "Julian, please, just act pitiful. Go to your biological father. If you get back into his good graces, we can finally have the life we deserve." "Lose my number," Julian said flatly, and hung up. To escape his thoughts, Julian plunged deeper into his relationship with Seraphina. They began spending almost all their free time together. Elena, noticing her wealthy best friend becoming obsessed with Julian, tried to warn her. "Seraphina, Julian is a dangerous, manipulative playboy. He's only using you for your money and status," Elena warned over coffee. Seraphina had simply smiled, stirring her drink. "I know exactly what he is, Elena. But my heart died a long time ago when Adrian left the country. Since I can't be with the man I actually love, I might as well spend my time with someone who keeps me thoroughly entertained. Julian is fun. Just keep him away from you and Liam. Okay." It didn't take long for Julian and Seraphina to cross the line into the bedroom. Their physical connection was intense and chaotic. Afterward, as they lay in the tangled sheets, Seraphina looked at him. "Julian, why are you chasing me so hard when it's obvious you still have a thing for Elena?" Julian rolled over, pulling her close, and whispered shamelessly, "Because, sweetheart, I love you the most. Your curves are absolutely irresistible." Seraphina laughed, accepting the sweet lie. They remained entangled for the next 3 months. But one afternoon, Julian arrived early at Seraphina's apartment. The door was slightly ajar, and he heard her talking on the phone with Elena. "Oh, Elena, you have no idea," Seraphina was giggling. "Julian is absolutely wild in bed. He's like an animal. Honestly, the only reason I haven't dumped him yet is because keeping him occupied keeps him from bothering you and Liam. Consider it my favor to you." Julian stood in the hallway, his expression blank. He quietly stepped back out, closed the door, and waited 5 minutes before knocking loudly, pretending he had just arrived. He had learned long ago that in their world, love was a luxury he couldn't afford to believe in. During his sophomore year, Julian began landing minor roles in low-budget web dramas, usually playing the arrogant, vicious villain. Seraphina found these shows incredibly amusing. Every Friday night, she would cue them up, laughing hysterically at his overly dramatic, villainous acting. In one particular scene, Julian played an overbearing CEO who slaps a subordinate with a highly specific facial expression, 30% cold indifference, 30% mocking amusement, and 40% casual arrogance. Seraphina laughed so hard she cried. Julian, annoyed but amused, pulled her onto his lap, tickling her until she gasped for air, calling him husband and begging for mercy. Mimicking his ridiculous CEO character's expression, Julian pinned her to the sofa. "Oh, you think my acting is funny? Let's see how you like the punishment scene." Chapter 8. The Yacht and the Setup. The fragile peace was shattered during a weekend yacht trip organized by their wealthy classmates. Julian had been invited by Seraphina, while Elena and Liam were also in attendance. Without Julian acting as a constant antagonist to fuel their drama, Elena and Liam's relationship had grown visibly stagnant and dull. Liam kept his arm wrapped tightly around Elena's waist, but her expression was one of complete apathy. She looked bored out of her mind. Julian walked past them on the deck, offering a casual, lazy nod. Elena immediately averted her gaze, her jaw tightening. Liam, sensing an opportunity to assert his dominance, stepped away from Elena and approached Julian near the railing. "Hey, Julian, I heard a rumor that you and Seraphina are officially dating. Is that true? A guy like you, dating an heiress like her? You must be dreaming." Julian felt a sudden, ominous twitch in his left eyelid. He didn't like the look in Liam's eyes. "Believe whatever you want, Liam," Julian muttered, turning to walk away. Splash! A massive spray of water erupted behind him, followed by frantic screams from the passengers on deck. Julian spun around. Liam was in the ocean, thrashing wildly. Within seconds, a nearby safety crew member threw a life preserver and pulled a shivering, drenched Liam back onto the yacht. Liam stood on the deck, coughing up water, his face pale as he pointed a dramatic, trembling finger straight at Julian. Julian, I treated you like a brother. I share my food with you. I brought you into my social circle. Why? Why would he try to push me off the boat? The deck went dead silent. Dozens of eyes locked onto Julian. Julian was utterly flabbergasted. The setup was so incredibly childish, so painfully obvious and poorly executed that he almost wanted to laugh. But before he could utter a single word of defense, a shadow fell over him. Slap! A sharp, ringing pain exploded across Julian's left cheek. Elena stood in front of him, her hands still raised, her chest heaving with rage. Her eyes were wide with pure fury. Julian, you shameless, disgusting bastard. How could you do something so monstrous? Julian's eyes narrowed, the sting on his cheek igniting a dark fire inside him. He leaned in close to her, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I didn't touch him, Elena. And let me tell you something. Whoever actually came up with this pathetic lie can lose 10 centimeters off their anatomy by tomorrow morning. A few feet away, Liam visibly flinched, instinctively taking a half step back. Chapter 9. Cold Water and Hot Nights. Elena ignored Julian's words, her face flushing with anger as she raised her hand to slap him a second time. But Julian wasn't about to play the victim twice. He caught her wrist midair. Elena struggled, trying to swing her left fist at him, but Julian was far stronger. In one swift motion, he scooped her up, lifting her completely off her feet and carrying her toward the edge of the yacht railing. Elena, who had a well-known, paralyzing fear of deep water and couldn't swim a stroke, instantly stopped fighting. Her eyes went wide with terror, and she wrapped her arms and legs tightly around Julian like an octopus, clinging to his bare chest for dear life. Julian, let her go. Are you insane? Liam screamed from the deck. Because Elena was wearing a skimpy bikini and Julian was shirtless, their bodies were pressed flush against each other. The intense heat of their skin cut through the cool ocean breeze. Julian felt Elena's heart hammering wildly against his chest, her breath coming in short, uneven gasps against his neck. What is all this racket? Seraphina stepped out of the yacht cabin, rubbing her eyes sleepily, looking thoroughly annoyed by the noise. The moment Julian saw her, he instantly shifted into victim mode. He dropped Elena onto the deck, leaving her standing there, breathless and momentarily stunned, and ran over to Seraphina, grabbing her arm. Seraphina, you have to save me. These crazy people are trying to bully your honest, peace-loving boyfriend. Seraphina looked at the chaotic scene, then at Julian's overly dramatic, pleading face. She let out a dry sigh. Julian, your acting skills are honestly terrible. When you act in those dramas, your face is as stiff as a board. If you had actually pushed Liam, your performance right now wouldn't be this unconvincing. Julian felt mildly insulted by the critique of his acting talents, but wisely decided to remain quiet. Liam, eager to regain control of the narrative, sneered. Seraphina, you're defending him? I can't swim. Why on earth would I jump into the ocean myself? Julian's patience finally snapped. He let out a loud, savage laugh. Oh, you can't swim, Liam? Let's test that theory. Before anyone could stop him, Julian charged at Liam like a raging bull. He grabbed Liam by the waist and launched them both over the railing, plummeting straight into the freezing ocean. The cold water shocked their systems. Beneath the surface, Julian grabbed Liam by the shoulders, pinning him down and actively forcing his head underwater. Liam panicked, thrashing wildly as he swallowed mouthfuls of salty ocean water. After a few terrifying seconds, Julian released his grip. To Julian's complete lack of surprise, Liam immediately shot to the surface and began swimming back toward the yacht with perfect, effortless strokes. Julian swam lazily behind him, letting out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed across the water. Oh, look at that. It's a miracle. The boy who couldn't swim is suddenly an Olympic athlete. Nice form, Liam. On deck, the surrounding classmates looked at each other in embarrassment, realizing they had been fooled by Liam's pathetic attempt to frame Julian. Seraphina threw Julian a dry towel as he climbed back aboard, thoroughly amused by his chaotic reaction. Meanwhile, A shivering Liam tried to wrap his arms around Elena to comfort her, but she silently and coldly stepped away from his touch, her eyes fixed on Julian. That night, the group stayed at a luxury seaside villa. The wooden walls of the rooms had notoriously terrible soundproofing. In their room, Julian and Seraphina engaged in loud, passionate, and deliberately noisy lovemaking. In the adjacent room, Elena lay awake in the dark. Having always insisted on saving herself for marriage, she and Liam slept in separate rooms. Hearing Seraphina's unrestrained, ecstatic cries through the thin wall, and remembering the raw, electric feeling of Julian's bare skin pressed against hers earlier that day, Elena tossed and turned, biting her lip in agonizing frustration as her own body betrayed her. Chapter 10. Spiked Champagne and the Balcony. A month later, Seraphina dragged Julian to a prestigious high society banquet. Almost immediately upon arrival, she was cornered by a group of wealthy socialites and dragged away, leaving Julian to wander the grand hall alone with a glass of champagne. As he stood near a marble pillar, he spotted Elena and Liam. Liam was behaving like a desperate, pathetic servant, constantly hovering around Elena, bringing her drinks and desserts with a flattering, eager smile. Elena, however, looked completely drained, her eyes cold and dismissive as she barely acknowledged his existence. Later in the evening, seeking some quiet, Julian stepped near the outdoor balcony. Through the heavy velvet curtains, he overheard the muffled sound of a fierce argument. "Elena, I am sick and tired of your attitude," Liam's voice hissed, filled with resentment. "I have spent millions on you. I bought you every bag you wanted. I gave you my allowance. And you still treat me like I'm invisible. After everything I've spent, you owe me. Oh, so because you spent money on me, I'm obligated to sleep with you?" Elena fired back, her voice trembling with rage. "What kind of cheap transaction do you think this is? If you think you lost out, give me your bank details, and I will transfer every single cent back to you." The balcony doors flew open, and Elena stormed out, her eyes red and glistening with tears. She ran straight into Julian, who was leaning casually against the wall. She froze, staring at him for a fraction of a second, before quickly brushing past him. Liam rushed out after her, but stopped when he saw Julian. He let out a bitter, venomous sneer. "I will never understand women. They ignore a decent, wealthy guy like me, but they lose their minds over useless, shameless scumbags like you. Maybe I should just learn to be a shameless bastard too." Julian rolled his eyes, taking a slow step toward him. "Keep talking, Liam, and I'll show you exactly how shameless my fist can be." Liam paled and quickly scurried back into the banquet hall. Julian decided to head up to the second-floor VIP lounges to retrieve his coat. He found the door to his assigned lounge locked. Annoyed, he knocked loudly. Suddenly, the lock clicked. The door flew open, and a hand reached out, violently yanking Julian inside and locking the door behind them. Julian stumbled, turning around to find Elena leaning against the door. Her face was flushed a deep, unnatural red. Her skin was covered in a light sweat, and she was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. Having seen enough drama in his life, Julian instantly recognized the signs. Elena had been heavily drugged with an aphrodisiac. Acting entirely out of self-preservation, Julian immediately whipped out his phone, turned on the camera, and snapped several close-up, high-definition photos of her flushed, desperate face. Elena weakly raised a hand to cover her eyes, her voice a slurred whimper. "Julian, stop. Why? Why do I feel so hot?" Chapter 11. The Blackmail and the Debt. Julian walked over to a nearby table, picked up an unopened bottle of mineral water, unscrewed the cap, and handed it to her. "Drink this." Elena grabbed the bottle with trembling hands, gulping the water down. She looked up at him, her eyes hazy. What did you put in this? Why are you doing this to me?" Julian rolled his eyes, letting out a mocking laugh. "Are you stupid, Elena? I just opened that bottle in front of you. Think about it. Who was the one constantly handing you drinks downstairs? Your precious, devoted boyfriend, Liam. He spiked your glass, and my sudden intervention just ruined his big plans for the night. Elena collapsed weakly onto the plush carpet, her body trembling as the drug coursed through her veins. You're shameless. Julian crouched down in front of her, holding up his phone to display the photos he had just taken. Elena, let's talk business. Since you love talking about practical value so much, let's see how much value you have. I want 10 million yuan to help you out of this lounge. Otherwise, I'll just leave you here and let Liam find you. Elena stared at him, her jaw tight, try her best to fight the overwhelming heat consuming her body. Julian was genuinely surprised by her sheer willpower. Most girls would have crumbled by now. If you don't agree, I'm leaving, Julian said, standing up and walking toward the door. Wait, Elena called out hoarsely, her voice cracking. Please don't leave. Call Seraphina. Just don't let Liam find me here. I beg you. Julian paused, looking back at her. A cold, calculating smile spread across his face. All right, I'll help you. But remember this. You now owe me a massive favor. Before he unlocked the door, Julian walked back over to her. Without warning, he raised his hand and delivered a sharp, stinging slap across her flushed cheek. Elena gasped, clutching her face as tears of shock and pain welled in her eyes. Why? Why did you do that? Julian leaned down, his eyes dark and merciless. That slap is payback for the one you gave me on the yacht. I told you before, Elena, I always collect my debts. As he walked down the stairs to find Seraphina, Julian ran straight into a frantic, sweating Liam, who was searching the hallways. Seeing the immense guilt and panic written all over Liam's face, Julian confirmed his suspicion. Liam was indeed the monster who had drugged his own girlfriend. Chapter 12. Kicking the steel plate. A few months later, one of the low-budget web dramas Julian had starred in became a surprise viral hit. Suddenly, his acting agent began treating him like a hot commodity, dragging him to a high-profile business dinner to meet potential investors. However, the main investor at the dinner, a wealthy and arrogant executive named Mr. Thorne, had no interest in Julian's acting talent. He viewed Julian as a cheap toy, demanding he perform ridiculous tricks and crawl on the floor like a dog to earn his investment. By the time Seraphina arrived at the private restaurant suite to check on Julian, the situation had completely devolved. Julian's temper had flared. When Seraphina pushed the door open, she found Mr. Thorne pinned to the dining table, his face turning purple as Julian forcefully poured a bottle of high-proof baijiu down his throat. Seeing Seraphina enter, Julian immediately let go of the gasping executive, wiped his hands with a napkin, and offered an awkward, innocent smile. "Oh, hey, sweetheart. You're early." Mr. Thorne sat up, coughing violently, and began screaming insults. "You bastard. I will destroy you. I will make sure you never work in this industry again." But his voice died in his throat the moment he recognized Seraphina. The Liu family's immense wealth and political connections were legendary. They could ruin his entire conglomerate with a single phone call. Mr. Thorne's face went pale, and he immediately began stammering apologies to Seraphina. Seraphina walked up to the table, her high heels clicking sharply on the floor. She looked down at him with a gaze of pure, icy contempt. "Mr. Thorne, let's be clear about something. You aren't sorry because you realize you were wrong. You're only sorry because you realize you just kicked a steel plate." Without warning, Seraphina raised her leg and stomped the sharp heel of her shoe directly onto Mr. Thorne's hand. The executive let out a blood-curdling shriek and fainted from the sheer pain. Seraphina sighed, turning to Julian as they walked out of the restaurant. "Julian, what on earth would you do if someone tried to take revenge on you when I'm not around to clean up your messes?" Julian wrapped his arm around her waist, grinning shamelessly. "Well, in that case, if we ever break up, you'll just have to introduce me to another incredibly rich girlfriend to protect me." Seraphina smacked his chest angrily, though a small smile played on her lips. "You heartless scumbag. You're already planning your next relationship before we're even done." Julian laughed, pulling her closer. "Hey, a guy's got to survive. But for now, how about a little romance?" Chapter 13. Tennis and Poison Words. That weekend, Seraphina invited Julian to a private country club to play tennis. To Julian's surprise, Elena was already there when they arrived. She was dressed in a revealing, tight white camisole and a short pleated tennis skirt that accentuated her legs. Notably, Liam was nowhere to be seen. During a break in the game, Julian walked over to the bench and handed Seraphina a cup of milk tea. Seraphina smiled, standing on her tiptoes to press a sweet kiss against his lips. "Thanks, husband." Julian suddenly felt a burning, intense gaze boring into his back. He quickly spun around, but the tennis courts were quiet, and Elena was seemingly busy adjusting her racket strings, her face completely expressionless. In the next round, Seraphina and Elena played a singles match. The game quickly turned fiercely competitive. Elena played with a wild, almost animalistic intensity, slamming the tennis ball with terrifying force, aiming her shots directly at Seraphina, as if trying to physically injure her. Seraphina, thoroughly annoyed, called out across the net, "Elena, did I do something to offend you? Why are you playing like you want to kill me?" Elena didn't answer. On the final match point, Elena's powerful shot flew wide, landing out of bounds. "Yes, we win," Julian cheered loudly from the sidelines. He ran onto the court, scooped Seraphina up in his arms, and spun her around in a joyous circle. As he did, he caught sight of Elena standing alone by the net, her face pale and icy as she stared at them. A few minutes later, Julian went to the club's locker room to grab some water bottles. As he turned a corner near the vending machines, Elena suddenly stepped out, blocking his path. Her neckline was pulled significantly lower than before, exposing her collarbones. She looked at him with a cold, mocking smile. "Julian, do you actually know about Adrian?" Julian frowned. "What about him?" Elena took a step closer, her voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "Adrian was Seraphina's childhood sweetheart. She was absolutely obsessed with him for years before he left the country. She waited for him every single day. Let me ask you, do you really think she actually likes a cheap substitute like you?" Julian shrugged indifferently. "Who cares? As long as she's spending her money on me right now, I'm perfectly happy." Elena's eyes flared with anger at his casual response. She stepped even closer, her breath warm against his neck as she whispered fiercely, "Julian, your so-called love really isn't worth much after all." With those parting words, she spun around and walked away, her short skirt swaying. Chapter 14. The Swap and the Contract. Elena's warning proved to be prophetic. A week later, Adrian officially returned to the country. Almost instantly, Seraphina's behavior changed. She became distant, constantly staring at her phone, her mind clearly elsewhere during their dates. Julian watched her silently, feeling a rare, genuine twinge of regret. He knew that no matter how much fun they had, he could never truly compete with the memory of her first love. On the day of Adrian's welcome back party, Seraphina called Julian to cancel their dinner plans. Her voice was flat and direct. "Julian, Adrian is back. I don't want him finding out about us. Let's take a break." Julian, leaning into his role as the pathetic, devoted simp, began dramatically pleading over the phone. "Seraphina, please, don't leave me. I can't live without you." "What am I supposed to do?" Seraphina let out a dry, weary chuckle. "Then I'll gladly collect your corpse after I get back." With that, she hung up. But Seraphina was nothing if not generous. An hour later, Julian received a notification from his bank. Seraphina had deposited 10 million yuan into his account as a breakup fee. Feeling a strange mixture of wealth and empty loneliness, Julian sat in his apartment. He took out his phone, dialed Elena's number, and said without preamble, "Elena, break up with Liam and become my girlfriend. And let me remind you, I still have those highly compromising photos of you from the banquet." To his absolute, utter shock, Elena didn't scream or hang up. She paused for a moment, her voice remarkably calm. "Fine. Meet me at the restaurant downtown in 30 minutes. When they met, Elena sat across from him, looking calm and composed. After a long silence, she looked up. "Julian, let me ask you, do you actually have any intimate photos of us?" Julian grinned, waving his hand dismissively. "Of course not. It was just a photo of us shaking hands at a student council event. But it worked, didn't it?" Elena didn't look angry. Instead, she let out a soft, tired sigh. It doesn't matter anyway. I already broke up with Liam last night. Julian froze, the smirk fading from his face. He had successfully stolen the female lead, completely destroying the original couple of C University, yet he felt absolutely no joy, only a deep, lingering exhaustion and the stinging phantom pain of being discarded by Seraphina. Chapter 15. The Perfect Fiancé. To Julian's absolute bewilderment, Elena took her new role as his girlfriend incredibly seriously. Unlike her relationship with Liam, where she demanded constant financial tribute, Elena never asked Julian for a single cent. Instead, she completely transformed into the perfect traditional partner. She cooked 3 elaborate meals a day, meticulously cleaned his apartment, washed his clothes, and displayed an incredibly passionate, submissive spirit of service in the bedroom. Julian quickly realized that Elena had a highly specific, latent personality trait. She seemed completely obsessed with his dominant, rough attitude. It was as if his previous slap in the VIP lounge had awakened a dormant, submissive side of her that Liam's gentle, subservient simping could never reach. A year passed, and their relationship culminated in an official engagement. One evening, Julian accompanied Elena to a grand gala held at a massive villa owned by the Liu family. As they walked inside, Elena whispered, "Just so you know, tonight is Seraphina and Adrian's official engagement party." Julian's chest tightened slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. As they walked through the crowd, they ran straight into Seraphina. The moment her eyes landed on Julian, a flash of pure panic and nervousness crossed her face. Adrian, elegant, refined, and looking every bit the perfect noble heir, walked over and politely shook Julian's hand. Julian smiled back, but internally his pride took a hit. He knew he looked like a crude street thug compared to Adrian's effortless class. Throughout the evening, Elena clung tightly to Julian's arm, her body pressed against his. When several wealthy guests approached them, asking about their relationship, Elena beamed with a sweet, proud smile. "He's Julian, my fiancé." Crash! A sharp sound echoed nearby. A few feet away, Seraphina had dropped her wine glass, the red liquid staining her expensive white gown as she stared at them, her face pale and trembling. Seeking an escape, Julian went to the restroom. As he stepped back out into the quiet hallway, Seraphina suddenly emerged from the shadows, cornering him against the wall. "Julian," she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. Are you really engaged to Elena? Tell me it's a lie." Julian let out a cold, mocking laugh. "Why do you care, Seraphina? Elena dumped Liam for me. And let me give you some advice. Don't tell me you suddenly regret leaving me. Delayed affection is cheaper than grass in the park." Seraphina looked utterly devastated, tears welling in her eyes. How could Elena do this? She knew how much you meant to me. Did you force her into this, Julian? Julian stared at her, realizing with a bitter sense of irony that Seraphina still believed he was beneath her social class, assuming he could only get her best friend through blackmail. Chapter 16. The Hallway Brawl. Before Julian could answer, Seraphina's grief turned into pure, hot anger. She grabbed him by his lapels, shaking him. "You scumbag! How could you move on so fast?" Julian, thoroughly annoyed, grabbed her wrists and shoved her back hard. "Let go of me, Seraphina." Suddenly, Elena stepped out of the shadows, inserting herself directly between them. She glared at Seraphina, her voice cold as ice. "Seraphina, you are about to get married to Adrian tonight. Yet here you are, physically grabbing my fiancé in a public hallway. Aren't you afraid of making a fool of yourself?" Seraphina's emotional restraint completely snapped. Slap! She delivered a vicious slap across Elena's face, screaming, "I asked you to test his loyalty for me while I was dealing with my family. I didn't ask you to test him all the way into your bed, you backbiting snake." Elena, refusing to play the victim, immediately lunged forward, grabbing Seraphina by her styled hair. The two wealthy, elegant heiresses began a violent, screeching physical catfight in the middle of the hallway, tearing at each other's expensive dresses. Julian quickly stepped between them, physically separating them as he yelled, "Stop it, both of you. Stop acting like you're in a cheap television drama." Seraphina, her hair ruined and her dress torn, pointed a shaking finger at Elena, her voice cracking with tears. "She betrayed me, Julian. She told me she hated you more than anyone, but she was secretly sleeping with you behind my back." Julian turned a cold gaze on Seraphina. "You threw me away like trash the second Adrian came back, Seraphina. You have absolutely no right to play the jealous ex-girlfriend now." Just then, Adrian's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Seraphina quickly smoothed her hair, leaning close to Julian to whisper, "I will explain everything to you later, I promise," before turning and walking back to her fiancé with her head held high. Julian raised his middle finger at her retreating back and walked out of the gala with Elena. Later that night, as Julian and Elena returned to his apartment, they found a disheveled, sleep-deprived Liam waiting outside the door. He looked completely broken, his eyes vacant as he stared at Julian. "Julian, you won," Liam whispered, his voice trembling with deep, echoing hatred. "Elena actually fell in love with a scumbag like you. But let me tell you, you're just picking up the trash that I discarded." Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh. "Liam, let me give you some advice. Being a pathetic simp only leads to losing everything. You acted like my wise brother who wanted to help me, but you loved watching me get humiliated just to make yourself look like a king. Now that I actually took her from you, why are you crying?" Elena walked out of the apartment, looking at Liam with cold indifference. "Liam, I am the one who changed. I wronged you, and I admit it. If you want all the money you spent on me back, give me your account details, and I'll pay you back every cent right now." Shattered by her complete lack of emotion, Liam began to cry. "I don't want your money, Elena. I just came to tell you that I'm leaving the country again. I'm going to study abroad. It's me, Liam, who is abandoning you." With that pathetic attempt to salvage his pride, he turned and ran down the hallway. Julian turned to Elena, smirking. "Well, looks like your husband just dumped you for good." Elena looked at Julian, a slow, sweet smile spreading across her face as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "He's not my husband, Julian. You are. So, husband, when are we finally getting married?" Julian felt a cold sweat break out on his back, realizing he had walked straight into a beautiful trap. Chapter 17. The Golden Cage of Success. In the wake of the engagement, Elena and Julian met each other's families. Meanwhile, news arrived that Seraphina had officially called off her engagement to Adrian, and Adrian had left the country once more, utterly humiliated. For the first 2 years of their engagement, Julian used every excuse in the book to delay the actual wedding. By the 3rd year, Julian's investments in short drama production companies had exploded. He was no longer the broke university student. He was now a highly successful, wealthy executive known in the industry as President Julian. At a high-profile business banquet, Julian ran into Seraphina. She had grown even more stunning, her youthful wildness replaced by a sophisticated, powerful aura. After consuming a significant amount of alcohol, Julian offered to drive her home. But old habits die hard, and they ended up in a luxury hotel room, spending a passionate, wild night together. The next morning, Seraphina sat up in bed, calmly lighting a cigarette as she looked at him. "Well, Julian, we have officially cheated." Following that night, Seraphina's attitude turned predatory. She made her terms crystal clear. If Julian dared to go through with his wedding to Elena, she would immediately release all the evidence of their affair to the public and destroy his hard-earned career. Trapped between 2 powerful women, Julian was forced to continue delaying his wedding to Elena. Elena, sensing his hesitation, grew increasingly suspicious and tearful, her domestic perfection slowly cracking under the pressure of his avoidance. Now, in the 4th year of this agonizing stalemate, news reached Julian that Liam was finally returning to the country. For the first time in years, Julian felt a deep sense of relief, hoping that Liam's return would finally break the chaotic deadlock. Chapter 18. The Truth in the Bedroom. Back in the present day, Julian lay in his bed, holding Seraphina's soft hand as they basked in the afterglow. "Tell me the truth, Seraphina. Julian asked quietly, staring at the ceiling. What about Adrian? Did you actually love him? Seraphina let out a soft sigh, resting her head on his chest. I never loved him, Julian. It was just a childhood obsession. You are the only man I have ever truly loved. She looked up at him, her eyes sincere. My family was forcing me into a business marriage with his family. Adrian and I made a secret pact to stage a fake engagement to satisfy our parents while we both worked to secure our financial independence. My plan was always to come back to you once I was free. Julian frowned. Then why didn't you just tell me that from the start? Seraphina rolled her eyes, playfully pinching his cheek. Because, Julian, your acting is absolutely terrible. If I had told you the truth, your guilty face would have given the secret away to my family within 5 minutes. She then expression darkened. And there's something else you need to know. Before I left, I trusted Elena to test your loyalty for me. But she betrayed me. She actively badmouthed you to me to keep us apart, all while secretly plotting to seduce you and take my place. She is a shameless, manipulative snake with absolutely no moral boundaries. Julian, you have to break up with her. Click. The sound of the front door unlocking echoed through the quiet apartment. Julian and Seraphina froze. The bedroom door pushed open, and Elena walked in, wearing the expensive beige trench coat Julian had bought her. The air in the room instantly turned to sub-zero temperatures. Elena looked at them in bed, her expression remarkably calm. She looked at Julian. I just went to the cafe downtown. I received an anonymous text message saying Seraphina wanted to meet me there to apologize, but she wasn't there. Now I see why. Julian cleared his throat, trying to break the tension. Elena, what about Liam? Didn't you go to see him? Elena blinked, looking genuinely confused. Liam? Who is that? Oh, him. Why would I ever care about him? Without another word, Elena marched across the room, grabbed Seraphina by her hair, yanked her out of the bed, and delivered a brutal slap across her face. You shameless B*TCH. Stay away from my fiancé. Seraphina, recovering instantly, lunged forward and slapped Elena back with equal force, screaming, He was my husband first, you backbiting thief. The two wealthy heiresses instantly devolved into a chaotic, screaming physical brawl, throwing vases, pillows, and decorative items across the room. Julian scrambled out of the bed, desperately trying to dodge the flying debris as he realized a terrifying truth. Neither of these women was a good person. Chapter 19. The New Rules of the Game. Julian had finally reached his absolute limit. The years of manipulation, blackmail, and walking on eggshells had exhausted him. It was time to play his ultimate card. He took a deep breath, channeled his absolute best, award-winning vicious CEO acting persona, and let out a booming, thunderous roar that echoed through the apartment. Stop it, both of you. I don't want either of you anymore. The room went dead silent. Both women froze mid-struggle, their hair ruined, their faces flushed. Slowly, their eyes filled with genuine, heartbreaking tears as they stared at him. Julian, please, Elena whimpered, her submissive side taking over as she fell to her knees, clutching his leg. Don't abandon me. You were the one who flirted with me first. Julian, you can't do this. Seraphina cried, her fierce facade crumbling into desperate tears. We were only one step away from our happy ending before she ruined everything. Julian let out a long, weary sigh. We're done. I am cutting ties with both of you permanently. Leave my house. And no, both women screamed in perfect unison. They quickly stepped away from Julian, huddled in the corner of the room, and began whispering frantically to each other for 5 tense minutes. Finally, they turned back to face him, their expressions remarkably unified. Seraphina cleared her throat, presenting their joint decision. All right, Julian, we have come to an agreement. We will share you. One of us will be the official wife, the other will be the mistress, and we will swap roles every 3 years. No arguments. Julian stared at them, utterly dumbfounded. He was amazed at his own success as a scumbag, but the absurdity of the situation was too much to bear. Almost instantly, the two women began bickering again over who would get to be the official wife for the first 3 years. Silence. Julian commanded, crossing his arms and leaning back against the wall. Both women immediately shut their mouths, looking at him like obedient schoolgirls. Julian raised his hand, pointing 3 fingers at them. Let's make something very clear. From this moment on, we play by my rules. Rule number 1. I will not participate in any ridiculous rotation system or run my personal life on a schedule. Rule number 2. I am not choosing between the two of you. Rule number 3. From this second onward, you both belong to me. No titles, no marriage guarantees, and no promises. Take it or leave it. He looked at them, his eyes sharp and merciless. Do we have any objections? Elena and Seraphina looked at each other, paused, and then meekly looked down at the floor. No objections. Julian nodded with cold satisfaction. He pointed to the shattered glass, thrown pillows, and messy apartment. Good. You two trash my apartment. Clean it up. Whoever does a better job of cleaning tonight gets to stay over in my bed. With that, Julian turned on his heel, walked into his master bedroom, and shut the door behind him. As he lay down on his clean sheets, he could hear the muffled, endless bickering of the 2 wealthiest heiresses in the city through the door as they fought over who got to use the broom first. Julian closed his eyes and let a slow, victorious smile spread across his face, deciding that as the ultimate villain of this story, it was best to simply enjoy the spoils of war in silence. Chapter 20. The Gilded Leash. Julian quickly learned that ruling a kingdom of 2 queens didn't make him a king. It made him a very busy prize. A year after the great cleanup, Julian's life had devolved into a bizarre, highly competitive domestic battlefield. His rules had indeed stopped them from fighting him, but had only forced Elena and Seraphina to turn their obsession into a highly strategic Cold War. Elena, true to her submissive yet deeply calculating nature, took control of his physical environment. She curated his wardrobe down to the thread count, ensured his favorite low-oil, high-protein meals were hot the exact second he walked through the door, and mastered the art of making him feel like an absolute deity in the bedroom. She had realized that Julian couldn't resist her when she played the quiet, devoted housewife who lived solely for his pleasure. Meanwhile, Seraphina attacked from the professional front. Using her family's massive venture capital firm, she quietly bought out Julian's short drama production company, installing herself as the majority shareholder and his literal boss. If I can't keep you locked in my bedroom all day, Julian, she had told him during a late-night performance review in her penthouse office, then I'll just buy the building you work in. Now lock the door. We have a merger to discuss. The climax of their bizarre arrangement came during the annual High Society Charity Gala. Julian, now a billionaire mogul in his own right, walked into the grand ballroom, flanked by both women. Elena wore a stunning, backless crimson gown that clung to every curve, while Seraphina wore a sharp, tailored black silk tuxedo that exuded raw power. They didn't argue, they didn't bicker. They simply walked in perfect, terrifying synchronization, each holding one of Julian's arms. The entire room stared in absolute, stunned silence. The gossip columns have been whispering about their arrangement for months, but seeing the city's 2 most desirable, wealthy heiresses willingly sharing the notorious, shameless bastard of C University was a sight no one could quite process. Even Liam, who had returned from abroad with a new, wealthy fiancée in a desperate bid to show off, froze near the buffet table. He stared at Julian, his jaw practically hitting the marble floor. Julian offered him a slow, lazy wink and raised a champagne glass in a silent, mocking toast. Liam looked like he wanted to throw up. Late that night, back at Julian's penthouse, the masks finally slipped. Julian was loosening his tie in the living room when Seraphina and Elena walked in, locking the front door behind them. The quiet, cooperative front they had put on for the media vanished, replaced by a tense, heavy electricity. You smiled at Liam's fiancée tonight, Elena said softly, stepping closer to Julian. She reached up, her fingers slowly unbuttoning his vest, her eyes dark and intense. Do you find her more attractive than me, husband? And you spent 3 extra minutes talking to that lead actress from your new drama, Seraphina chimed in, leaning against the doorframe, a dangerous, predatory smile on her lips. She tapped her tablet screen. I can cancel her contract by tomorrow morning, Julian. You know I will. Julian let out a dry laugh, leaning back against the sofa. I told you both the rules. I don't answer to either of you. If you don't like how I play, the door is right there. Instead of flinching or backing down, Elena and Seraphina exchanged a brief, knowing glance. Seraphina walked over, tossing a thick, leather-bound document onto the glass coffee table. It made a heavy, ominous thud. Julian frowned, looking at the title, CO Ownership and Partnership Agreement. What is this? Julian asked, raising an eyebrow. Elena and I realized something, Seraphina said, sitting on the armrest of the sofa, her hand resting heavily on his shoulder. Your rules were clever, Julian. You thought by refusing to choose, you'd keep us fighting each other forever while you reaped all the benefits. But we're both highly successful, practical women. We hate losing. Elena knelt in front of him, resting her hands on his knees, looking up at him with a sweet, terrifyingly devoted smile. So we pooled our assets. Seraphina's family firm and my family's trust have officially merged. We bought out every single one of your personal bank loans, your company's debts, and even the deed to this very penthouse. Julian's eyes narrowed. He grabbed the contract, flipping through the pages. Every single asset he owned, every production company he had built, was now legally tied to a joint entity controlled entirely by Seraphina and Elena. You've got to be kidding me, Julian muttered, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. We love you, Julian, Seraphina whispered, leaning down to press a soft, slow kiss against his jaw. But we also know exactly what you are. You're a wild, shameless wolf. And the only way to keep a wolf from running away is to build a cage so big and beautiful that he never realizes he's trapped. Elena finished, her voice a purr as she kissed his neck. Julian stared at the contract, then at the two breathtaking, dangerous women flanking him. He had spent years playing the ultimate villain, manipulating everyone around him, believing he was the one pulling the strings. But in his arrogance, he had forgotten a fundamental rule of the game. When you steal two queens, you don't get to keep them in separate boxes. Eventually, they will team up to rule the board. He looked at the pen Elena was holding out to him. He let out a loud, genuine laugh, a mix of utter disbelief and raw, excited adrenaline. You both really are incredibly vicious, Julian murmured, grabbing the pen. He signed his name with a flourish, tossing the contract back onto the table. All right, let's see who ends up wearing the leash. Elena's eyes flared with sudden, submissive delight, while Seraphina's smirk turned fiercely triumphant. As they both pulled him down into the cushions, Julian closed his eyes, completely accepting his fate as the most thoroughly, deliciously ruined man in the city.